Kimberly here. This is Macabish, Cults, Classics, and Horrors. We're talking films, series, books, and life, and we're starting right now. L Katz. He was a producer and writer on Tales from the Crypt from 1989 to 1996. He wrote the screenplay of Bordello of Blood.
I love Bordello of Blood. It was so much fun.
He was a writer on The Outer Limits from 1995 to 2002. He also was a writer on Children of the Corn 2, The Final Sacrifice. Freddy's Nightmares. He was a writer from 1988 and 1990, and as well as being a producer on most of those.
And I'm thrilled as pieces to be here. If we go back to the very beginning, as Maria sings in The Sound of Music, the very best place to start. I've always been into old movies. I think storytelling was the one skill set I bring to this planet. A key moment in my evolution as a storyteller. I'm 6 years old, 7 years old. I'm in a birthday party for a kid named Michael Gold, and his dad has, this is how bloody old I am, an 8mm projector is showing us Laurel and Hardy movies.
I love Laurel and Hardy.
And it is Laurel and Hardy's Big Business, where they're Christmas tree salesmen here in Southern California. And, you know, they're not very good at it. And they end up at the house of James Finlayson. He's one of the character actors that they worked with all the time. Bald guy with just a great face. And he doesn't want to buy a tree, and yet they insist. And at the end, they destroy his house and he destroys their truck. That's it. And it's an escalating gag that is increasingly outrageous. At the age of 7, when I saw this, something inside me went, well, first of all, that's hilarious. And second of all, how can I do that?
Right.
And the next thing that happened was I fell in love with Groucho Marx.
Oh.
I saw.
God, I love the Marx Brothers.
At the age of 10, I saw. I grew up in Baltimore, and at 4 o'clock, from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock, before the evening news played, maybe it's from 3:30 to 5, they would put movies on. A lot of classic movies: W.C. Fields, Jack Oakey, Marx Brothers. And the first one I ever saw, my cousin Stephen turned me on to them because he was already a fan. And I saw Horse Feathers. And the beginning of Horse Feathers, Groucho, as the new president of Huxley College, delivers a monologue that is just a staggering display of verbal gymnastics. The wordplay is stunning. It's funny. It's inventive. It's outside the box. And it's attacking the man. It is telling truth to power, and power doesn't know what to do with it. And something inside me went, wow, what if you could do that too? Be funny and go after the man. And so that's really where it all started. And yeah, I always loved old movies, and I've always been a writer. Now, it never occurred to me when I was a kid that I would ever end up in Los Angeles doing what I do. This is not anything I ever expected. When I went to college, I went to Vassar, and I was originally a film major. Then I switched to just straight drama major. I had a professor of dramatic literature, a guy named Everett Sprinshore, one of the world authorities in Strindberg and Ibsen, and his lecture on Ibsen's Ghosts was a seminal moment, just where I suddenly understood how storytelling works, how it's supposed to work, what it can do in the hands of, you know, someone, an Ibsen, an amazing drama. And I suddenly understood the storytelling aspect. And I thought when I was in New York, I thought I was going to be in the theater. And actually, when I graduated from Vassar, I thought for about 2 seconds I was going to be an actor. I went to one audition and I thought, oh my God, what kind of a schmuck makes a living this way? And so, the only other skill set I had was writing. So I thought, I'll go be a schmuck that way. But and that's kind of where the other piece of this happens. I growing up where I grew up, I had a friend from high school named Carol Yumpkus, who she had gone off. Her dream was to go be an agent, and she went off and became an agent in William Morris in Los Angeles. And I was in communication. I was living in New York. I was doing training films and industrial films, not exactly burning up the world, but I was aspiring. I was writing a plays, and I was trying to put together a musical that I had written. And Carol said, you should try writing a screenplay. And so I wrote a screenplay, and I sent it to her. And she said, this is pretty good. You should come out and talk to people. Now, at that point, I was hardcore New York, East Coast all the way. To me, LA was the stupidest place on the planet. The land of the avocado head. I'd been out here once when I was 14 on a teen tour. Yeah, there was nothing that interesting about LA to me. Yeah, it was the place where the movies came from. That was the only thing of interest. But I'm not a star fucker, but by nature, I'm interested in those people, but not in. My motivation is something else. I want to work with those people. It's not just meet with them. I want to co-create with them. That's my goal.
Right.
But all right, I said to Carol, sure, okay, I'll come out for a week, and everybody was so nice to me. Oh my God. Well, first of all, I was in New York in June 1985. And where are you guys based?
I'm in Texas. Chris is in Canada.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Well, all right. So I grew up on the East Coast, and you're in Texas. Humidity.
Mhm. Yes.
And June in New York. Oh my God, it's 90 degrees and 1,000% humidity, and it's exhausting to walk out the door, and it
Mhm.
smells. Walking around Manhattan at that particular point, man, the stench of urine, and it's just. But in Los Angeles, it's the desert. There is no humidity.
Right.
85 degrees, and it's really nice. And like I said, people were lovely. It was 1985. This place was not nearly as crowded as it is today. So driving around was not the headache then that it is now. After a couple of nights, my agent took me to a movie premiere, St. Elmo's Fire.
Oh.
And that was rather intoxicating, as you can imagine. Like I said, people were great at meetings. My fourth morning, I didn't have any meetings, and someone suggested I take a drive through Topanga Canyon. And that part of LA, it's really lovely. Now, these days it's built up a bit, but back then it was much more wild and remote within the city limits. And as I was driving from the Pacific coast, from the 101 through the canyons to where it meets the ocean, I got swayed. And by the time I got to the PCH, it was done. And I sold out my soul. Goodbye. I became an Angelino. And I began to plot my move. And then suddenly it was all about, all right, how do you break into this business? Now, that first week when I came out to Los Angeles to meet and greet people, these meetings that my agent then, Carol Yumpkus, had set up, was a guy named Gil Adler.
Oh.
And so Gil was one of the first producers I met in 1985 when I came out to meet and greet and try the place out. And Gil was definitely the first person to tell me when I was told him I was hemming and hawing about whether to move out or not. He said, "Don't be an idiot." I think he was harsher than I said, "What are you, a schmuck? There's nothing for you in New York. Everything for you is out here. Come write screenplays." And so, Gil and I became not only co-workers, but we became best friends for a decade.
Excellent.
Now, among the things that I just put out is I'm doing a podcast called the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. Season 1 was the story of the making of Bordello of Blood.
Mm-hmm.
And that Bordello of Blood, after Gil and I had been partners for nearly a decade, Tales from the Crypt was, and I'll go back and tell some of that story. But Tales from the Crypt was the dream.
Yeah.
And Bordello of Blood was the nightmare that ended everything.
Oh.
And it literally, Bordello was between the start of production and the day of release. My relationship, my creative relationship, my friendship with Gil Adler ended completely.
Oh no.
And the making of Bordello of Blood really had a lot to do with it. So, and again, we'll circle back. This is a dream job. And Gil and I, when I met Gil, I had no idea where that ride was going to go, and it ended up. Gil was an accountant by training, and he'd worked for a lot of years. And we talk about this in the podcast, how our relationship evolved, how it became Tales from the Crypt, and really the glory years that was Tales from the Crypt. Gil was a terrific producer because he understood the basics of accounting. If you have $1, you can't spend $1.
Right.
If you can produce what you're producing for 99 cents, hey, look, now you got a penny
Right.
left over. And so it's really it's that simple. But the problem solving can't be, just, no, we can't spend more money, because that doesn't solve the problem. This is where the creativity has to step in, and you have to, and again, it's always about problem solving, how to answer the dream in your head with the time and the money that you have.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the challenges. That's the problem. The little rat inside your head has to solve. That's the maze that you're running through. And that's the challenge. And I think as Gil and I began to work together, we meshed as storytellers, but we also meshed as a creative organism, because Gil understands how to produce. He's just a great producer. I think I'm all right. I'll pat myself on the back. I think I'm a damn good storyteller. And so between the two things, we can problem solve our way out of virtually anything without compromising the story that we're trying to tell.
Excellent.
And so in terms of what that partnership did, the ideal of collaboration, and that's also what our podcast is about. It's the joys, the pleasures of collaboration. There's nothing quite like it. When the sum is greater than the parts. Wow. It's quite something. I'm sure you've been part of this yourselves, where you're part of something bigger than you.
Yeah.
That's bigger than everyone put together, all the people who were doing it. And it's such a special feeling.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's what making a film or a TV show really is about. It's the quintessential creative experience. And when it's good, there's nothing like it. Now, Gil, like I said, was a skilled producer. He knew how to problem solve effectively. Wasn't much of a writer up until our partnership, but because he was such a skilled and problem solver and producer with the money, HBO had hired him on a bunch of projects, and he had saved HBO's ass on a thing called Vietnam War Stories. He had worked for them previously on a show called The Hitchhiker, and when after its second season, Tales from the Crypt was $1 million in the shitter, and really they were going to cancel it after the third season because no one cared. To take care of the third season as just as a guy there, just to escort it to the graveyard, they hired Gil. When the executive producers, all right, look, HBO at that particular point had done a couple of TV shows. First and 10 about football, Brian Benben's show, but those were TV shows on HBO.
Right.
They're still TV shows. Yeah, they had some nudity, but is that the difference between HBO and TV? Just tits? Is that it?
Right.
And then the executive producers of Tales from the Crypt, they had this incredible material, the EC Comics. And what they pitched to Chris Albrecht at HBO was something bigger. And the deal was each episode was going to be its own little feature film in a way. And the first 3 episodes that they produced, Dig This Cat, He's a Real Gone, Dick Donner's episode, the night before, Bobsy's Christmas episode, and Walter Hill's The Man Who Was Death are 3 amazing episodes. And so HBO committed to doing it. The problem was, these were feature film guys. They didn't do TV. They didn't think of TV as TV, and they were approaching them as a bunch of little feature films. And so they never had a deficit partner they never set it up like a TV show. Because the way a TV show works is the license fee will never cover the cost of the initial production. It just won't. And so what you normally do is you get a deficit partner. Now, the old TV paradigm was you had to get the magic number was 45. 45 episodes. That's it's a 9-week schedule slot of episode, 13 weeks times 5. What is it? 65 was the magic number. You had to get to 65. It was a 13-week ad cycle times 5 episodes a week. Gives you 65. And so TV shows weren't built around anything other than getting to the magic number of 65 so you could syndicate and make the real money. And so that the guys making, so that whoever was the deficit partner would get their money back and profit.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. The Tales from the Crypt partners never did that. And so when the episodes went into deficit, as they all did, the only person there with money was HBO. And so they covered it. And the night before the season 2 wrap party, HBO handed the executive producers a financial statement and said, guys, get out your checkbooks. You owe us $1 million. And the first thing the executive producers did was cancel the wrap party. So, because that additional $3,000 would have broken the bank, but they fired the producers and they hired Gil. And because Gil and I were writing partners, we wanted to run it like a TV show. So I got basically crammed down everyone's throat. Gil insisted on having me. Initially, I went aboard as the story editor, the person who would really do that function of a TV show where you manage the scripts. And that's how you manage the budget, by managing the scripts. You don't send anything out to your department heads for production that they can't afford to do.
Right.
Going in. Now, they might have ideas that are more expensive than you anticipated, but this is all the negotiation of production. So, when Gil and I went aboard Tales from the Crypt, that first season was supposed to be the very last season. But Gil and I had other plans. I went into that a huge fan of the EC Comics. I loved Bill Gaines's world. God, I did. I loved Mad Magazine. And the first time that I ever encountered Tales from the Crypt was a year before I got hired. They had just done their first season, and it was up for awards. And I was, as usual, an unemployed writer. And so there used to be a thing called the Cable Ace Awards, which was how the cable business was competing with the Emmys. And they had because I was an unemployed writer, I was available to be a judge for writing for the Cable Ace Awards. And so they had a dozen unemployed writers in a lovely suite at the Century Plaza Hotel, which no longer exists. And there were 12 of us, and they handed us a sheet with all the stuff, the programming we'd be watching that day, 8 hours worth of stuff. And the first thing at the top of the list was the first 3 episodes of Tales from the Crypt. Now, I'll tell you, every last one of us, not knowing what that show was, all 12 of us looked at the first thing we were going to watch that day, and we thought, there's an hour and a half we'll never get back. We assumed it was going to be just a waste of our time.
Yeah.
And as the episodes began to roll, the first episode that rolled was Dig This Cat, He's Real Gone. It's fantastic. And as the episode is rolling, all the writers, we're all looking around at each other because we're all having the same thought in our head. We had all thought this was going to be a waste of our time. And we're all thinking the same thought as we're watching this show. God damn, this is fantastic. How do I get onto this bloody show? Get my agent on the phone right now. We're all thinking that thought. I know I was, and I know everyone else was.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the opportunity came to do that show, it was a dream. It was, I couldn't tell you how those dominoes fell, but damn if they didn't. And so I found myself and my partner Gil running a show I loved, and a show that we both wanted to save. The two things we did when we took over Tales was we reinvested in the franchise.
Okay.
The irony, what I loved about all the Vault of Horror, the Tales from the Crypt, and all those EC comics when I was a kid reading them was how wicked. Well, they were wicked fun.
Mm-hmm.
You were laughing at things and enjoying things that you were not supposed to laugh at and enjoy.
Right.
I'm a rebel, and so that went right to my heart. And so I wanted to reinvent the rebelliousness. But there was something else that I really wanted to put our attention to. To me, it was more important than anything. Before I took over really managing the show's franchise, the Crypt Keeper, basically he sat in the same costume on the same set and basically variations on the same couple of puns for 20 some odd episodes before I came in. And my question when I first met with Barry Josephson at Silver Pictures was, I'd like to know what the Crypt Keeper does when he's not being the Crypt Keeper.
Good question.
When he punches out at the end of the day, when he's no longer working and he goes home, what does he do? Who are his friends? What are his interests? Excuse me. What are his hobbies? And that suddenly opened up not just the Crypt Keeper, but the franchise. And yeah, really the Crypt Keeper, giving the Crypt Keeper the chance to sing and dance, I think is really what allowed Tales from the Crypt to take off the way that it did.
Yeah, you can actually give that character a life outside of just being the tool to get you between episodes.
Yeah, that suddenly people thought about him when they weren't watching him.
Mm-hmm.
To me, Tales from the Crypt was more black comedy than horror.
I can agree with that. Yeah.
And so that was really, to me, that was our franchise. And so I always looked at to push the envelope in terms of where we could go on TV that people had never done before. An example of really, to me, pushing the envelope was the Food for Thought episode that Gil directed with Christopher Reeve and Judd Nelson and Bess Armstrong and Meatloaf.
That was a good episode.
First of all, when we were doing an episode about cannibalism, and our terrific casting director Victoria Burrows, when she suggested Meatloaf, I must have laughed for 10 minutes. I mean, who's writing this? It was such a hilarious idea. Even if he had sucked, I probably would have done it just because it's hilarious. It's hilarious. It so happened that it worked. I'll tell you a funny little story about casting Meatloaf. One of the real pleasures about doing Tales from the Crypt was, like I said, getting to work with people whose work I admired. I meeting them was cool, yeah, but working with them, putting words into their mouths, co-creating with them. To me, this is nirvana, absolute nirvana. When I was in college, when I was at Vassar, hey, one of the movies that we all loved was Rocky Horror Picture Show. And so, Meatloaf in that, and Meatloaf's Bat Out of Hell album was something that we danced to all the time. And so to hire the man was so heady, I can't tell you. So our problem was, when Victoria suggested this, it was great. He was, I think he was touring, doing something at that point. We didn't cast Meatloaf until, really 4 days before he was scheduled to work. The problem was, it was a body cast we had to do. We had a gag involving Judd Nelson going into a large refrigerator unit and where a body is hanging and whacking off 2 butt steaks and putting them on a platter to take out and throw onto the grill. Well, creating a body cast of that time takes time. A body cast like that takes time. It takes a week, 10 days, really, to get it right. So, Todd Masters had to begin working way before we cast. And so we knew we were, in order to play the gag, we knew we were going to cast a heavyset person.
Right.
And when we cast Meatloaf, we assumed we were casting a heavyset person. And so it didn't seem to be a problem. The day before he was to work, Meatloaf joined us for his wardrobe fitting. And to our shock, the man had been on a diet.
Oh, no. Of course.
A crash diet. He had lost something like 75 pounds, and he was so proud of it. He looked great. But alas, he did not match the body. He said was him that was going to be hanging in the meat locker. And so we had a problem. And so we had at some point, there was going to be a shot where, we were going to say that body hanging in the meat locker was Meatloaf. And he wanted to see the body, and we couldn't say no. And so we showed him the body, and he was understandably upset, but he understood our problem. And there was nothing to be done. He was, the world was going to see him as he was and not how he had become.
Right.
The larger problem was that, when we sent him into wardrobe, he still had to look like a guy whose naked body was going to look like that. And so he had to agree to wear a fat suit.
Oh boy.
That was the part that kind of stuck in his craw a little bit. He couldn't be the new svelte diet Meatloaf. He had to be the old jumbo loaf.
Yeah.
Todd tells the story in the podcast. Years later, he worked with Meatloaf's daughter and Cyndi Lauper. Cyndi Lauper referred to Meatloaf's daughter as Little Loaf, I think. It turned out that Meatloaf had held a grudge. He carried a grudge after that. He kind of resented Todd for just how terrible the body looked.
No.
But it just made for a funny story at the end of the day, and nothing more than that. But the other, it's funny, I got to work with the most amazing people. The end of that third season, that first season that Gil and I were on, Tales from the Crypt, what was supposed to be the last episode ever of Tales from the Crypt was supposed to be Yellow, that Bob Zemeckis directed. And it turned out just to be the last episode of season 3, because during the season, we turned the franchise around, and the audience responded to the fact that we were aggressively pursuing actors and getting them. We were writing, we were really focused in on making the scripts the best we possibly could, and we were succeeding. And the Crypt Keeper suddenly was popping. And so midway through the season, and also because I should also point out that the first thing that the partners did, because they had to spend $1 million of their own to pay back HBO, they took $1 million off our budget to pay themselves back. Understandably so. So we were producing the show and getting great response for $1 million less. And so when we got to the end of the season, including producing Yellow, while HBO ordered 2 more seasons, it was 2 more seasons at $1 million less.
Oh yeah.
We got punished for being frugal. But that's the only way that we knew how to do it. Doing Yellow was an amazing experience. That was let me jump back in time for a second as to how transformative Tales from the Crypt was for HBO. Like I said, prior to Tales from the Crypt, HBO had done TV series. They'd done, TV shows. When they were screening, this is a story that John Kassir tells in the podcast. when they were screening the first 3 episodes for the cast and crew, and some reviewers as well, it blew everybody away. And sitting there in wherever the screening was, a couple of the crew were sitting there, and one of the crew says, "Wow, this is amazing TV." And the other crew person said, "It's not TV, man, it's HBO." In the row ahead were HBO executives who turned around, having recognized and just having heard their ad slogan for the foreseeable future.
Awesome.
It was at a screening of Tales from the Crypt that HBO suddenly said, "We're not TV, we're HBO."
Amazing.
And so that too was part of our mandate, to be HBO and not TV. And so thinking big was always part of what we were mandated to do. Yellow was an incredible experience. When we came aboard, like I said, when Yellow was going to be not the end of the series, but just another episode on the way to the next season, Bob Zemeckis' dream was his whole thing. He wanted to pay homage to a movie that he had fallen in love with when he was a film student at USC, Stanley Kubrick's Paths of Glory.
Okay.
It's a World War I story starring Kirk Douglas. And this was a World War I story, the script episode. And so he wanted to do Paths of Glory. And so he wanted Kirk Douglas. The script had been written by 2 very big feature writers, but frankly, it wasn't very good. And it wasn't good enough to get Kirk Douglas. Bob knew this, and he wasn't willing to send it to Kirk's agent for it to be turned down. And so he knew the script had to be fixed. And so since I was the story editor that first season, Bob turned to me and said, "Can you fix this? We need to get Kirk. We got to get Kirk." And so I rewrote the script, and hey, to me, nothing is more important than characters. The characters have to make sense as real, honest to goodness human beings.
Right.
And that's really all that I did. It's a father-son relationship. And that father-son relationship had to work. The son had to work as the son. The father had to work as the father. And so that's really all I did, was I invested in their humanity.
Okay.
And lo and behold, Bob felt, yeah, okay, this is worth a shot. We sent the script to Kirk Douglas's agent, and we got Kirk.
Excellent.
And so, hey, that was all good news. The good news was that Bob became a fan, and later, when Bob did his next episode, which was his last episode, the You Murder episode, it wasn't a question who was going to write it. He turned to me and said, "Are you going to write this for me?" Yeah. I went, "Oh, yeah, okay." Well, he said this to Gil and I. Now, the cool thing about working with and for Bob Zemeckis is that he is the most amazing collaborator there is, as far as I know. Everything I know about the collaborative process, really, I learned at that man's feet. It is so much fun working for Bob, because it is always a backbreaking creative challenge. And you can go back and look at virtually any Bob Zemeckis film, and there's going to be a shot or two. You won't know it. Most of the audience won't know it. But filmmakers watching will recognize, holy shit, that's an impossible shot. I don't know how that's not possible. How did you get that? That's not possible. That's part of the fun of working with and for Bob. There going to be a challenge. There's going to be a challenge or two like that. Well, for me, one of the first challenges was get Kirk Douglas. I don't know how you're going to do this, but you got to get Kirk Douglas. All right, we got it. And Bob helped. Bob gave me notes that helped me address the issues that would get us Kirk. So Bob never says, you figure it out. I'm going to sit here and wait for you. Bob contributes significantly to it. The end product is greater than all the parts. On You Murderer, when Bob, we knew that Bob was going to do that. It was going to be the last episode of that season. Gil and I went up to Bob's house just outside of Santa Barbara. We had lunch, and after we pushed the lunch aside, he sat back. He said, "All right, guys, all I know is I want to do a completely subjective camera show from the point of view of a dead guy." A subjective camera means it's one single point of view. That's it. We no coverage, just one character's point of view, nothing to cut to. It's whoa, okay, a single camera point of view from anyone, from a a half an hour of that is already a challenge, and it's a dead guy. And we go, okay. And so Bob begins to chuckle because he's already put something on the table that's all right. This is already a challenge. And then he puts down the Joker. He says, and I want the dead guy to be played by Humphrey Bogart.
Oh, is that all?
Okay. So, and what he was thinking about was that every time our subjective camera, the character whose story we're telling from that exclusive point of view, every time they pass a reflective surface, we're going to see them. And we're going to pass reflective surfaces all the time. We're going to make a point of it. And every time we see them, it's going to be Humphrey Bogart. But it can't just be his face. We want to see him talking. We're going to buy film clips, and he's going to be saying a line that, in essence, is what the character is thinking. And so we're going to have to figure out a way to get into that clip and a way to get out of that clip without breaking stride in our subjective camera story. And so the creative challenge was multi-tiered and multifaceted. And he sat back as he does, and he looked at Gil and I, and he said, all right, how are we going to do this, guys? You are rats problem solving a creative challenge. Here's an example of when I first saw Bob's Castaway. Remember, it's just Tom Hanks on a deserted island.
Mm-hmm.
There's the moment when Tom's character, there's that big mountain in the center of the island. He climbs it.
Right.
And he gets to the top of it, and he does a 360. He sees that the island is surrounded by coral reefs. So getting out is going to be really hard. But as he climbs to the top, the camera is on his shoulder. Tom is in the shot the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And as he reaches the top in the shot, and the top of that hill, it's nothing. There's barely space for Tom to stand. He does a 360 as he surveys the everything surrounding this little piece of land. Where's the crew? This was long before we had GoPros, where you could literally stick it behind his ear and you could make that shot today.
Right.
When Bob shot that, no, man, he was shooting that with big 35 millimeter equipment, which required a crew, and even going bare bones with a Steadicam operator. There was no place for the Steadicam operator to stand. So watching it, having worked with Bob, I knew when they were on location, I know this scene happened for a fact. They went up, they all walked up that mountain. And when they got to the mountain and they saw it was this little teeny, because you see in the shot, there's no space there. And Bob told them what he had in mind. Yeah, Tom's going to come here, and the cameras, he's going to be in the shot the whole time. And he's going to do this, he's going to do that, he's going to turn. And then he looked down at all the guys looking up at him thinking, how are we going to do this, Bob? And Bob asked that question. How are we going to do this, guys?
Yeah.
And lo and behold, there's an answer. And the audience never even considers that it's an impossible shot.
Right.
But it's an impossible shot. And that's part of what makes working with Bob so exquisite. He's an amazing filmmaker. And as a collaborator, he brings out the very best in everyone he works with. That's really, of all the lessons I've ever learned working in this business, that's the biggest takeaway. Mm-hmm. If that's the end result of every time you go and you work, that you make something that at the end is greater than the parts, that's fantastic. Doesn't guarantee you success. That's hard. There's all kinds of greatness that either never gets recognized or doesn't get recognized in its time. But that doesn't mean that it's not.
This is the #1 place for macabrish cults, classics, and horrors. For synopsis, reviews, and news, go to macabrish.com. Thank you for listening. Signing out until the next one.